I want to create a world in which my son is proud of what we do, in a world and a job that actually does impact people's lives for the better.
William and Catherine have just delivered the kind of palace shock Queen Camilla likely never imagined she would face during King Charles's reign. She still has the title, she still wears the crown, but the influence and long-range authority many assumed would remain with her are now shifting elsewhere. Catherine is stepping into the spotlight. William is tightening his grip on the future, and behind closed doors, one devastating question is hanging over everything. Was Camilla truly part of this transition, or had the decision already been made before she even took her seat? The announcement opened with 3 heavy words. "We sadly announce." William stood at the microphones with an official palace document in hand, while Catherine remained just behind him, poised, composed, and impossible to overlook. Then came the confirmation that Camilla would gradually step back from the responsibilities that had long placed her at the heart of royal life. State occasions, overseas tours, major receptions, charitable work, even palace planning were all framed as part of a respectful handover. But the real message was crystal clear. Camilla may still appear at Charles's side, yet the role she likely expected to keep is now being filled by Catherine. This was never just about easing a schedule. It was the first unmistakable sign of a new royal era, and for those watching William and Catherine move closer to the center of the monarchy, this is exactly why support matters. Don't celebrate Catherine's rise. Watch the future unfold, and then quietly disappear without backing the platform, exposing these royal shifts. Subscribe, like, and share, because silence only helps the old guard act as though nothing is changing. Just hours before the statement was made public, a stream of cars slipped through a private entrance at Windsor. Senior advisors arrived first. Princessin followed, offering reporters nothing. Catherine came carrying a slim folder. Camilla, by all accounts, believed the meeting would focus on Charles's lighter schedule and the mounting pressure on the remaining working royals. When she took her seat, the atmosphere was calm, perhaps too calm. William began speaking about continuity, stability, and preparing the monarchy for the next generation. Charles sat quietly. Catherine opened her notes and watched the table. No one said Camilla's future aloud, but every sentence edged closer to it. Then William placed a dark folder directly in front of Camilla. One look at the heading, and she reportedly froze. This was not language about temporary support. It was not framed as a short break or a period of rest. The wording pointed to something far more serious, a transfer of responsibility. She read it once, then again, and when she looked toward Charles, his expression gave her no comfort at all. Viewers, if you're pleased to see Catherine stepping forward, say it plainly in the comments, yes or no. And if William and Catherine are the royals you truly believe should lead the future, show it by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing. It costs nothing, but refusing to support them while claiming you stand behind them says more than any comment ever could. Camilla wanted answers immediately. She asked who had drawn up the arrangement. She asked when Catherine had agreed to take on the receptions, state visits, and major charitable duties. She asked whether and had reviewed it. Then she turned to Charles and asked the one question that changed the mood in the room completely. Had he approved it? No one answered right away, and that silence said more than any carefully polished palace line ever could. Charles eventually described the changes as a form of protection. The workload had become intense. The monarchy needed consistency. William had to prepare for what lay ahead, and Catherine had emerged as the family's strongest public figure. Camilla listened without cutting him off, but the explanation only sharpened the tension. Protection usually begins with agreement. This had started with conversations she had never been included in. Catherine stayed calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't push back. She didn't need to. The dates had been reviewed. The duties had been reassigned. Then William revealed the detail that made the situation impossible to misunderstand. The public statement was already finished. The press had already been tipped off. The microphones were already being prepared. Even the opening line had been chosen. Camilla was not being asked whether the transition should happen. She was being given one final choice: stand beside the announcement, or let the world see it happen without her. As she stared at the document, the truth became unavoidable. William and Catherine were no longer waiting politely for the future to arrive. They were already building it, and Camilla had just discovered that the power to shape what came next was slipping out of her hands. When the public announcement was finally delivered, it came wrapped in the kind of language palaces use when they want a major shift to sound gentle. Nothing was described as a removal. Nothing was called a demotion. William spoke instead about balance, continuity, and the need to shield Queen Camilla from an increasingly punishing schedule. Catherine stood beside him, solemn and perfectly controlled, as if every phrase had been considered long before the cameras rolled. Officially, Camilla would remain queen. She would keep select patronages, continue appearing at family events, and still stand beside Charles when necessary. But the fine print told a far more revealing story. Several state receptions would now go to Catherine. Major charity appearances would be reassigned. Future overseas tours would put William and Catherine front and center. Even longer-term palace planning would increasingly be routed through the Wales household. That was the real headline. Camilla was not losing her title, but she was being separated from the daily duties that gave that title real weight. The wording was careful enough to avoid open war, but sharp enough for royal insiders to spot the shift instantly. One phrase surfaced again and again: future arrangements. Not temporary cover, not short-term support. Future arrangements. That language stretched far beyond Charles's present workload and hinted at a structure designed to last. Then there was the absence no one could ignore. Camilla was nowhere beside them. There was no reassuring group image of 4 senior royals standing united. No warm statement from Charles applauding his wife's service. No carefully managed family appearance to calm speculation. William spoke. Catherine stood beside him. Camilla existed only as the subject of a decision being announced about her. Before William had even finished, reporters were already glancing at their phones. Had Buckingham Palace issued a second statement? Had Camilla personally requested these changes? Was Charles fully involved in every part of this? Palace aides offered polished responses, but none touched the one question everyone was asking. Did Camilla actually choose this? The answer, at least in public, was silence. And that silence moved faster than the announcement itself. Within minutes, commentators were dissecting Catherine's expression, William's delivery, and the empty space where Camilla might have stood. Some praised it as a compassionate adjustment. Others saw it as the first unmistakable moment the next generation stopped waiting for permission. Inside Windsor, Camilla was reportedly reading the same statement line by line. What troubled her most was not one lost appearance or one removed duty. It was the pattern. A reception here, a tour there, a charity event quietly passed on. Each change looked small on its own. Together, they painted a future in which Catherine became the monarchy's most visible woman, while Camilla appeared only when tradition demanded it. For years, Camilla had believed her place beside Charles would remain secure throughout his reign. She had weathered fury, endless comparison, and decades of public scrutiny to reach that point. Becoming queen was meant to end the uncertainty. Instead, this announcement introduced a fresh kind of instability, hidden beneath the language of care and transition. Charles still had the crown, Camilla still had the title, but William and Catherine now had the direction. The first revised engagement calendar reportedly arrived before the public reaction had even cooled. Camilla opened it expecting a lighter diary, perhaps a few postponed appearances, and some duties temporarily shared with Catherine. What she found looked far more strategic than temporary. Catherine's name appeared beside receptions Camilla had assumed she would host. William and Catherine were listed as the lead royal presence for selected overseas visits. Several charitable engagements had been moved without any suggestion they might one day return. Camilla's own entries were fewer, shorter, and increasingly described as optional. One detail reportedly hit harder than all the rest. Her role in future state visits was no longer described as central. It was described as ceremonial. That single word altered the entire picture. Central means influence. Ceremonial means being present without holding the reins. Camilla closed the calendar and asked for an explanation. Palace staff repeated the public line. The transition was respectful. The changes were intended to ease pressure. The monarchy was planning carefully for the future, but no one called the changes temporary, and no one offered any promise that the duties would ever return. Then she reached the final page. Attached was a private note for senior review. It listed the responsibilities Catherine would take first, followed by a second list marked for later transfer. Camilla read the heading and saw something even more chilling. Her name was not on it. The final line referred to her role in future palace decisions, and beside it were two quiet words: consultation only. Catherine had been placed at the center of the working schedule. Camilla had not simply been reduced. She had been moved out of the room. What reportedly unsettled everyone most was that Camilla did not raise her voice. She set the calendar beside the folder, folded her hands, and began asking questions with startling precision. Who had authorized the transfers? When had Catherine been consulted? Which advisors had signed off on the new order of precedence? And why had Camilla been shown the final plan only after the public wording had already been drafted? No one rushed to respond. Charles looked down. William remained still. Catherine's expression did not flicker, and watched Camilla with the quiet focus of someone measuring not only the words, but the pressure behind them. Camilla turned first to William. She didn't want reassurance. She wanted dates. William explained that the review had started weeks earlier after senior officials warned that the monarchy's future program could not depend on Charles sustaining the same pace indefinitely. Engagements had been mapped out. Overseas obligations had been compared. Charitable commitments had been ranked by profile importance, and how many years each royal could realistically continue carrying them. It sounded administrative, but it was anything but. When Camilla asked when Catherine's name first appeared next to her duties, William said the first draft had been exploratory. The second had been practical. By the third, advisors were no longer debating whether Catherine would take on more responsibility. They were discussing how quickly it could be done without provoking open conflict. That answer landed with force. Camilla had spent years surviving the kind of scrutiny that never truly disappears. Every appearance was weighed against Diana. Every smile was analyzed. Every effort at steadiness was viewed by some as strategy. She had spent decades trying to rebuild a public image that once looked impossible to recover, standing beside Charles through criticism, delay, and uncertainty. The crown was supposed to bring security. Instead, it seemed to have started a countdown. Charles finally spoke, saying the changes were not meant to diminish her. He talked about strain, expectation, and the need to avoid another crisis, forcing rushed decisions later. He reminded her that selected patronages would remain hers, and that no one was challenging her place beside him. Camilla listened until he finished, then asked why protection required taking decisions away from her before discussing them with her. The atmosphere tightened instantly. Charles said William carried responsibility for the future. Camilla answered that William was preparing for his own reign, while acting as though Charles's was already beginning to narrow. The remark was calm, but it landed exactly where Charles was most vulnerable. He had waited a lifetime to become king, and now every practical argument seemed to lean beyond him. Camilla understood that wound because she carried one of her own. She had believed that once Charles reached the throne, the uncertainty would finally end and they would stand at the center together. Instead, William's growing authority and Catherine's enormous public strength had redrawn the balance faster than either of them expected. The palace had noticed. Briefings once sent first to Charles's household were now being copied to the Wales team. Overseas organizers increasingly asked whether William and Catherine would attend. Charities requested Catherine by name. None of it seemed dramatic in isolation. Together, it formed a verdict. The future was gathering elsewhere. Camilla then turned to Catherine and asked whether she had sought the receptions, the state visits, and the charitable appearances listed in the new plan. Catherine reportedly answered that she had requested none of it. She had simply been asked whether she could shoulder the work, and she had answered honestly, yes. That one word changed everything. Catherine was not apologizing. She was not openly battling for position. She was simply refusing to pretend she was unready. When Camilla asked whether popularity should determine palace authority, Catherine replied that popularity could fade, but public confidence could not be dismissed when the monarchy relied on public support for its survival. Charles shifted in his chair. William stayed silent. The conflict was no longer hidden behind polite language. Camilla returned to the timeline and asked who had reviewed the third draft. One advisor named William, another named Catherine, a third hesitated before mentioning Princess Anne. Camilla looked across the table and did not look away. In that moment, Camilla understood the proposal had gone far beyond the Wales household. William and Catherine had not acted alone. Someone Charles trusted deeply, someone whose judgment and discipline were rarely questioned, had already examined the plan. Camilla's voice reportedly lowered as she asked, and one final question. Did you know they intended to do this? And paused. And in that pause, Camilla seemed to realize that the answer might decide whether this was a family disagreement or a full palace consensus, and did not answer immediately. She glanced toward Charles, then back at Camilla, as though weighing how much truth the room could bear. Finally, she said yes, quietly but clearly, and with that, the balance inside Windsor shifted again, and did not present the plan as some triumph for William, nor as a punishment for Camilla. Her reasoning was colder and far harder to challenge. The monarchy, she said, could not organize itself around sentiment. It had to place long-term responsibility with the people capable of carrying it for the next 20 or 30 years. That meant William. That meant Catherine. She acknowledged that Camilla had earned respect through years of service beside Charles. She also admitted that the way the transition had been handled would inevitably feel personal, but delaying it, and warned, would only make the eventual shift harsher. The family could prepare while time allowed, or it could wait until public pressure forced the decision in full view of everyone. Camilla stared at her, and had not taken a side in a family quarrel. She had sided with the institution, and that made the whole thing feel less like pressure and more like judgment. For those who have long wanted to see William and Catherine trusted with the future of the crown, this is where support counts. It's easy to cheer Catherine at a glittering state reception. It's easy to praise William when he speaks about duty. But if viewers truly believe they should lead the next chapter, then subscribe, like, and share this story now. Otherwise, the loudest defenders of the old order will keep drowning out everyone asking for change. Up to that point, William had seemed like the main architect of the restructuring. Anne's admission revealed something else entirely. Catherine had been central to making the transition workable. She had reviewed which ceremonial duties could be absorbed without turning family life into a permanent public performance. She had examined charity schedules, overseas tours, and the demanding preparation required for state visits. She had also reportedly insisted that Camilla keep the patronages most closely tied to her personal work, and she had rejected wording that would make the change sound humiliating. Catherine wanted the transfer to be decisive, but not vicious. That distinction mattered. Camilla then asked whether Catherine had been protecting her dignity or simply protecting the palace from backlash. Catherine is said to have replied that both concerns mattered, but neither solved the practical issue. The crown needed continuity, the public needed confidence, Charles needed support, and the next generation could not remain in rehearsal forever. Camilla's expression reportedly tightened as she asked whether Catherine believed the monarchy was already hers to shape. Catherine did not look to William before answering. She said the monarchy belonged to no single woman, not to Camilla and not to her. It belonged to the duty each generation was expected to carry, whether that duty arrived gracefully or not. The room fell still. Then Camilla asked the question underneath every other question. Would Catherine take her place beside Charles at major state occasions? Catherine's answer was measured. She would stand wherever the crown required her to stand. Nothing more, nothing less. Outside Windsor, the announcement was already splitting public opinion. Some felt Camilla deserved a quieter life after enduring years of scrutiny. Others saw Catherine's rise as long overdue. And then there was a third group who believed something even bigger was happening, a reign beginning in practice before it had begun in name. The imagery only intensified the debate. William at the microphones, Catherine behind him, the official document between them. Then a second image surfaced from the private meeting itself, grainy and distant, showing William and Catherine near Camilla as a dark folder was passed across the room. No one could hear a word, but Camilla's expression told its own story. The image spread in minutes. Commentators pored over every detail, from William's posture to Catherine's fixed expression to the way Camilla held the document. Even Charles's absence from the frame became part of the conversation. Yet the palace offered no smiling group photo, no reassuring embrace, no visual display of unity, only carefully managed words and one image that no one could easily explain away. Then a senior advisor reportedly returned to the meeting room, carrying one final document. It was slimmer, but even more consequential. This one was not about next month's calendar or the first charities Catherine would inherit. It dealt with future coronation anniversaries, Commonwealth events, state banquets, and every major occasion that might follow if Charles could no longer keep up a full public schedule. Camilla reached for it, but the advisor did not let go. The document, she was told, had not yet been authorized. William had reviewed it. Catherine had prepared for it and supported its purpose. But one signature was still missing, Charles's. And until the king signed, no one in that room knew whether Camilla's smaller role would remain a careful adjustment or harden into the permanent structure of the monarchy's future. Charles reportedly remained alone with the unsigned document after the others had been asked to leave. For several minutes, he did not touch it. The room may have emptied, but the pressure certainly had not. William's argument was about readiness. Catherine's was about capability. Camilla's was about loyalty, shared history, and the belief that Charles's reign should not become a waiting room for the next one. Every case carried weight. Every option came with a cost. The document sat at the center of it all. Charles knew exactly what his signature would do. It would not take away Camilla's title. It would not diminish their marriage or erase the years of work she had put in. But it would create a structure that no longer depended on her being at the center of events. Once signed, planners would look first to William and Catherine whenever the royal calendar demanded certainty. That, perhaps more than anything, was the part Charles could not overlook. He had waited his entire life to be king. He had imagined the ceremonies, the burden, and the chance to shape the institution in his own name. Yet now, early in his reign, he was being asked to approve a future in which his son and daughter-in-law would carry the momentum, the attention, and the authority most people associated with the crown. It was practical, yes, but it was also deeply personal. When William returned, he reportedly did not push for an instant answer. Instead, he spoke about the risks of delay. State visits are organized months in advance. Charities need dependable patrons. Commonwealth officials require clarity. Overseas governments need to know who will represent the monarchy if Charles has to step back again. The crown, William argued, could not wait for another crisis before making plans. Charles listened. Then William made the point Camilla had feared most. In the public imagination, Catherine was already doing the work. Crowds responded to her. Organizers wanted her there. Her appearances traveled around the world in minutes. The palace could either acknowledge that reality or keep pretending the future had not arrived. Charles asked whether popularity should shape royal structure. William said no, but added that public confidence could not be treated as irrelevant. That answer reportedly lingered in the room. Before Charles could respond, Camilla came back in. She had read the latest draft, and there was no mistaking her concern now. She argued that reducing her role would not only affect her, it would make Charles look temporary, as if his reign existed mainly to prepare the way for William. She reminded them that hierarchy mattered, and that monarchy could not be run on applause, headlines, or social media excitement. If every popular royal moved toward the center, then titles themselves would eventually lose meaning. For the first time, William's expression is said to have hardened. He replied that this was not about applause, it was about endurance. Charles and Camilla could continue to serve, but the institution needed people capable of carrying its heaviest responsibilities for decades. Refusing to plan would not protect the king. It would expose the crown. Camilla answered without hesitation. His plan, she said, protected the future by making the present look weak. The words landed exactly where she intended. Charles then stood and asked everyone to leave except Anne. Camilla paused at the door, glancing toward him as if waiting to be called back. He did not do it. Anne remained standing until the door closed. Then she told her brother what neither William nor Camilla had managed to say quite so plainly. The decision had to be his, not William's, not Catherine's, not Camilla's. If he signed because his son had pushed him, resentment would follow. If he refused because his wife feared losing influence, the uncertainty would only deepen. He had to choose what protected the monarchy and then live with whatever personal cost followed. Charles asked if and believed Camilla had become an obstacle, and answered carefully. Camilla was not the obstacle, she said. The fear of disappointing her was. That distinction mattered, and advised him to preserve Camilla's dignity, keep the patronages most connected to her, and ensure she remained beside him at key moments. But the future-facing work had to move, not because Camilla had failed, but because time moves in one direction and the palace could not resist that forever. Charles returned to the table and read the final page once more. Then he changed the document. The new wording no longer said that Camilla was being removed from central duties. Instead, it introduced a broader rule. Whenever the sovereign's workload required support, the Prince and Princess of Wales would assume primary responsibility for the Crown's public program. On paper, it sounded neutral. In reality, it changed everything. Camilla's name vanished from the conflict, but the outcome remained the same. William and Catherine would become the automatic center whenever Charles stepped back. Charles signed. Before sunset, the palace had prepared its statement. Camilla was allowed to review it, but by then the decision itself could no longer be undone. At the bottom of the final page sat one sentence that said it all. The Prince and Princess of Wales will assume primary responsibility for the Crown's future public program. Camilla reportedly read it in silence, then asked when the palace intended to tell the world. The second statement was released shortly after sunset, and this time the wording left far less room for spin. Camilla would keep her patronages, continue to accompany Charles when needed, and retain her title. But William and Catherine would now lead the Crown's future public program, whenever the king reduced his schedule. The announcement looked measured. Its impact was immediate. Within hours, state planners were redirecting briefings to the Wales household. Charity offices received new contact details. Overseas teams were told to structure future visits around William and Catherine's availability. Nothing explosive happened in public, yet the machinery of royal life had already begun moving in a new direction. Camilla's name stayed on the page. Her influence did not. The first unmistakable sign came at a reception scheduled for the following week. Camilla had expected to host it beside Charles. Instead, Catherine entered first, greeted the guests, and led the evening while William stood just behind her. She moved through the room with effortless precision, speaking with diplomats, charity leaders, and senior officials as though the role had always belonged to her. The photographs raced across the media, Catherine at the center, William looking on with approval, Charles arriving later, Camilla absent. Palace aides said the Queen had opted to rest, but that explanation did little to slow the reaction. Supporters of William and Catherine called it the clearest evidence yet that the monarchy had entered a new phase. Others wanted to know why Camilla had not appeared at an event so closely tied to her position. Inside the palace, no one asked that question out loud. Camilla reportedly watched the coverage in private. She saw the headlines celebrating Catherine's confidence. She saw the guests leaning toward her. She saw how easily the public embraced the new arrangement. There was no confusion, no visible resistance. The transition had gone exactly as William predicted. That, perhaps, was the part that hurt most. After the reception, Charles joined her and tried to separate the institution from their private life. He told her that titles, schedules, and public attention could not define what they meant to each other. Camilla listened, then gave him the answer he had likely dreaded. She had not spent decades reaching the center of royal life, only to be told that the center no longer mattered. Charles reminded her that she was still queen. Camilla replied that a title can remain long after authority has shifted somewhere else. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not fury, it was recognition. By the next morning, another shift reportedly appeared. A briefing on Commonwealth gatherings had been sent first to William's office. Catherine's advisors were copied before Camilla's. The detail was small enough to sound administrative, but inside palace walls, people understood exactly what it meant. The new hierarchy was no longer symbolic. It was operational, and did not celebrate the change. She believed the family had chosen the least damaging route, but she also knew Camilla would never experience it as kindness. A respectful reduction is still a reduction. A ceremonial role is still smaller than the place Camilla believed she had finally secured. William, for his part, reportedly refused to frame the transition as a win. He spoke only about service, preparation, and stability. Catherine followed the same line. Neither needed to criticize Camilla. Every successful appearance made the argument on their behalf, and that was the final revelation. The announcement had never been solely about easing Camilla's workload. It identified the two people the palace now expected the public to follow into the future. William was no longer standing at the edge of his father's reign. Catherine was no longer simply waiting for inherited responsibility. Together, they had become the monarchy's active center, while Charles still sat on the throne. Camilla remained beside him, but no longer in front of what comes next. Did she agree to the arrangement? In public, she offered no objection. In private, the answer appears far more complicated. Acceptance can look a lot like consent when the alternative is public humiliation. She may not have signed anything. She may not have protested in full view. She may have smiled when required, but that does not automatically mean the decision felt freely chosen. For viewers who believe William and Catherine are the future of the royal family, this is the moment to show it. Subscribe, like, and share, because watching them step forward while refusing to support the stories exposing how it happened only helps the palace keep its most important moves in the shadows. Charles is still king. Camilla is still queen. But the direction, the attention, and the long-term responsibility now point toward William and Catherine. The future did not begin with a coronation. It began with 3 words: "We sadly announce." And the next video will reveal the private instruction Camilla reportedly gave her closest aide after watching Catherine take her place at that reception. It involved a sealed letter, a cancelled appearance, and one name Camilla allegedly did not want included in the palace's next announcement. Miss that detail, and you may miss the first real sign that she is not prepared to step aside quietly